The stars above the Charon Nebula had not changed in 4,000 years. That was what High Commander Varek told himself every morning when he stepped onto the observation deck of the Eternal Sovereign, the flagship of the Galactic Dominion's Third Fleet. He told himself that because it brought him comfort. The stars were old. The stars were steady. The stars did not lie, did not betray, did not make demands. They simply burned, and in their burning, they reminded Varek that the universe was a place of order, of power arranged properly, of weak things orbiting strong things, of lesser beings bowing to greater ones. The Galactic Dominion had ruled for 4,000 years. 40 centuries of expansion, of conquest, of careful and methodical absorption of every species stupid enough or unlucky enough to be discovered by Dominion scouts. There were currently 112 species under the Dominion's authority. Some of them had fought back. Most had not lasted long enough to regret it. The Dominion had weapons that could crack a moon. It had ships that could fold space. It had biological weapons that could sterilize a planet in 72 hours, leaving the land intact but every living thing on it dissolved into gray ash. No one had ever beaten the Dominion. No one had ever come close. Varek pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold observation glass and stared out at the stars with his 3 amber eyes. He was a Keth, tall, gray-skinned, with a skull that curved backward in a long, elegant slope that his species had always considered a mark of intelligence. And the Keth were intelligent. There was no denying that. They had been the first species in this arm of the galaxy to achieve faster-than-light travel. They had been the first to build a unified planetary government. They had been the first to reach out to the stars and say very calmly and very firmly, "All of this is ours." 4,000 years later it still was. High Commander. Varek turned. His second officer, Subcommander Leth, was standing at the entrance to the observation deck. Leth was younger than Varek by 120 years, barely middle-aged by Keth standards, and she had the kind of sharp, precise energy that Varek had always found useful in subordinates and mildly exhausting in social settings. "What is it, Leth?" "We have received a signal from Scout Unit 7. Leth's 3 amber eyes were steady, but Varek knew her well enough to notice the small tension around the edges of her jaw. Something had unsettled her. "They have found a new system." Varek turned fully. Class 4-star. 7 planetary bodies. Third planet is habitable." Leth paused. "It is more than habitable, High Commander. Scout Unit 7 describes it as, their word was lush." Varek felt the familiar cool interest of a predator who has just heard a sound in the grass. "Population." "Yes." Leth paused again, and this time the pause was long enough that Varek's 3 eyes narrowed. "High Commander, Scout Unit 7 detected electromagnetic signals from the planet's surface approximately 6 weeks before they entered the system. Complex signals. Structured signals. Technological signals." "Yes, sir." Varek turned back to the observation window. His breath made a faint mist on the glass. "What technology level are we assigning them?" "That is where it becomes complicated." Leth crossed the deck and stood beside him, lowering her voice. "Scout Unit 7 sent their preliminary report. The planet has what appears to be a pre-interstellar civilization. No faster-than-light travel detected. No evidence of space colonization. Their most advanced orbital constructs appear to be small unmanned satellites and 1 small station near the planet." Varek almost smiled. Pre-interstellar. That meant primitives. That meant easy. That meant the Dominion would send a standard classification team, make contact, show the locals enough firepower to ensure cooperation, and add world number 113 to the register. Simple. Plain. Fast. "So what is complicated about it?" he asked. Leth was quiet for a moment. "The signal complexity, sir. Our linguistics division has been analyzing their electromagnetic broadcasts for the past 6 weeks. Music, visual entertainment, scientific data, military communications, commercial advertising, they broadcast everything, seemingly without concern for who might be listening. Our analysts have made significant progress in decoding their primary language." Another pause. "High Commander, their scientific understanding, even from their public broadcasts alone, is not what we expected from a pre-interstellar species." Varek looked at her. "Explain." "Their public science broadcasts discuss quantum mechanics, relativistic physics, biological engineering, materials science, and computational theory at a level that our analysts initially assumed must be an error in the translation algorithms." Leth held his gaze. "It was not an error. This species, they call themselves humans, has achieved theoretical mastery of disciplines that took the Dominion 3,000 years to develop, and they appear to have done it in roughly 300. The observation deck was quiet for a long moment. Varric turned back to the stars. Pre-interstellar, he said again, but this time the word felt different in his mouth. Heavier. Like a stone that had looked like a pebble until he tried to lift it. Pre-interstellar, Leth confirmed. No evidence of active FTL travel. But High Commander, she hesitated. Their theoretical understanding of FTL mechanics, based on broadcasts we have decoded, suggests they are not unaware of the concept. They are apparently working on it. Varric was silent for a very long time. The stars burned outside the glass. Steady. Unchanged. Send a message to the Dominion Council, he said finally. Tell them we have found a new species. Tell them I am moving the fleet to their system for standard first contact. And their technological level? Varric thought about this. Tell the Council we are assigning them Class 2. Leth blinked all three of her eyes. Class 2 was reserved for species that had achieved basic interstellar travel. Species that required a larger fleet, a more careful approach. Assigning Class 2 to a pre-interstellar species was almost unheard of. It would raise eyebrows on the Council. It might even raise questions about Varric's judgment. But something in his bones, some ancient predator's instinct that 4,000 years of Dominion supremacy had not quite bred out of the Keth, was telling him to be careful. Class 2, sir? Class 2, Varric said quietly. And tell the Council I want the Eternal Sovereign and both sister ships. I want all 3 dreadnoughts. Leth straightened. Yes, High Commander. She left. Varric stayed at the window. The planet of the humans was still 42 light-years away. Still invisible from here, lost among 10,000 other stars. But Varric found himself staring in approximately its direction. The way he might stare at a locked door when he heard something moving on the other side. Theoretical mastery, Leth had said. 300 years. He pressed his four-fingered hand flat against the cold glass and made himself breathe slowly. What are you? He whispered to the stars. The stars, as always, did not answer. 6 weeks later, the Eternal Sovereign and its 2 sister ships, the Unyielding Law and the Throne of Ash, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of a solar system the Dominion had not yet named. Standard procedure was to designate new systems by catalog number until a species name was confirmed. The catalog entry read, System 7 Care 4401. Third planetary body, candidate for absorption. Species designation, humans. Varric stood on the command bridge and looked at the main holographic display. The system spread out in front of him, a yellow star at the center, surrounded by the orbits of 7 planets. The third planet glowed blue and green, wrapped in white clouds, unmistakably alive from 40 million kilometers away. It was beautiful. Varric had seen 100 worlds. 100 conquered, catalogued, processed worlds. This one was beautiful. Status on the planet? He asked. Active electromagnetic signals confirmed, reported Signals Officer Dren. We are receiving broadcasts on multiple frequencies. Video, audio data. Our translation algorithms are now at approximately 67% accuracy for their primary language. They call it English. Military status? We are detecting several orbital satellites. We count 43 in various orbit classes. 1 space station approximately 400 meters in length in low orbit. We are also detecting a single vessel in the outer system, appears to be a long-range probe. No weapon signatures detected on any of these constructs. Varric looked at the display. 43 satellites. 1 station. 1 probe. Primitive. Simple. Easy. Have they detected us? He asked. Dren hesitated. Unknown, High Commander. Their sensor technology should not be capable of detecting us at this range. However, another hesitation. We have detected increased activity in their military communication channels in the past 48 hours. It may be coincidence. Or it may not be, said Leth from beside him. Varric nodded. Continue passive observation. I want 24 more hours of analysis before we make any move. He looked at the blue-green planet on the display. And I want every broadcast their people have made in the past 30 years. Every scientific paper. Every military communication we can decode. I want to know what they know before they know we're here. Yes, sir. The 3 dreadnoughts hung in the outer system like 3 metal mountains, their running lights off, their engines at minimum output, watching. And on the planet below, completely unaware, or so Varric believed, 7 billion humans went about their day. The 24 hours passed. Then 36. Then 48. Varric did not give the order to move closer. He kept reading reports. The reports were making him increasingly uncomfortable. Lieutenant Commander Ress, the fleet's chief science analyst, had been working through human broadcasts with a team of 30 specialists. She came to Varek's private briefing room on the second day with a data tablet and a look on her face that Varek had never seen on a Keth officer before. The look was something close to fear. "Sir," she said, setting the tablet on the table between them, "I need to walk you through what we have found." "Sit down, Ress." She sat. She organized her notes with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who was trying very hard to appear calm. Varek waited. "High Commander, I want to preface this by saying that my team has checked these findings 6 times. We have been extremely careful about translation errors, context errors, and confirmation bias. What I am about to tell you is our best current understanding, and it is not what I expected when I took this assignment." "Tell me." Ress took a breath. "The humans have been spacefaring for approximately 60 years. In that time, they have placed more than 10,000 objects in orbit around their planet. They have sent unmanned probes to every planet in their system, including their outer gas giants. They have landed living beings on their own moon 6 separate times. They have maintained a continuous inhabited presence in space for over 20 years. She paused. "None of this is unusual for a Class 3 species on the standard development track. But their theoretical science is not on the standard development track." Ress touched the data tablet and brought up a series of equations. "High Commander, I need you to look at this carefully. This is from a human public science broadcast. A documentary, their word for an educational visual program available to any member of their population." Varek looked at the equations. He had a strong mathematical background, all senior Keth officers did. He looked at the equations for a long moment. Then he looked at them again. "This is unified field theory," Ress said. "Specifically, it is a description of the relationship between gravitational fields and quantum probability states that the Dominion's own science division achieved." She paused. 230 years ago. After 3,000 years of continuous scientific development. The room was very quiet. "The humans achieved this," Varek said slowly, "We estimate this particular theoretical framework was published by a human scientist approximately 80 years ago," Ress said. We believe the human term is a thought experiment. A theoretical exercise. It was not immediately understood or accepted by the broader human scientific community. It took them approximately 40 years to experimentally confirm it." Varek stared at the equations. "Show me more," he said. Ress showed him more. For the next 4 hours, she walked him through what her team had found in the human broadcasts. Materials science that the Dominion had only recently developed, described in human textbooks as foundational concepts, taught to their young. Energy physics that the Dominion's military research division had classified as cutting edge, discussed on human public news broadcasts as promising but still theoretical. Biological engineering principles that the Dominion had never achieved, being experimented with in human university laboratories. And then there was the computational theory. "This," Ress said, and her voice was noticeably quieter now, "is what concerns me most." She brought up a new set of data. Varek looked at it. It described, in the human mathematical notation his team had decoded, a theoretical computing architecture unlike anything in Dominion science. It described a system that could perform calculations not by processing information sequentially or even in parallel, but by existing in multiple computational states simultaneously, by using the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics not as a problem to be corrected but as the fundamental operating principle of the machine itself. "We call this concept theoretical quantum computation," Ress said. "The Dominion Science Division has been working on the theoretical basis for approximately 60 years. We have not yet achieved a functional prototype." She touched the tablet. "The humans call it quantum computing. They published the theoretical basis 40 years ago. And High Commander," Ress looked at him with those calm, careful eyes that were not quite hiding something else underneath. "Based on their more recent broadcasts from the past 5 years, they appear to have functional machines." Varek was very still. "Functional," he repeated. "Functional," Ress confirmed. "Not stable. Not widely deployed. But functioning. And improving rapidly." She folded her hands on the table. "High Commander, I have been a science analyst for the Dominion for 60 years. I have assessed 112 species. I have never seen a development curve like this one. The humans are accelerating. Not just progressing, accelerating. The gap between what they knew 30 years ago and what they know today is larger than the gap between what they knew 100 years ago and what they knew 30 years ago." Varek stood up from the table. He walked to the small porthole in the briefing room wall and looked out at the stars. The blue-green planet was not visible from here. But he knew its direction. They are still pre-interstellar, he said. Technically, yes. They have no confirmed FTL travel. Technically. Ress was silent for a moment. High Commander, in their scientific journals from the past decade, there are multiple papers discussing FTL travel. Not as science fiction. As engineering problems. Problems they are actively working to solve. She paused. Based on their rate of advancement, my team's best estimate is that the humans will achieve functional FTL travel within 50 to 80 years. Varric turned from the porthole. Or less, he said. Ress held his gaze. Or less, she agreed. Varric looked at the data tablet on the table. At the equations that a human had written 80 years ago. At the technology that a dominion of 4,000 years had only recently matched. He thought about what it would mean if humanity achieved FTL travel on their own. Without being discovered first. Without being absorbed and slowed and redirected, the way the Dominion absorbed every species it found. He thought about what it would mean if humanity's acceleration continued. We go in now, he said. Standard first contact protocol. Full display of force. All 3 dreadnoughts, full power signatures visible. I want the humans to understand immediately and completely what they are dealing with. And if they do not cooperate? Varric picked up his command badge and fastened it to his uniform. They will cooperate, he said. Every species cooperates when they see what we bring. He almost believed it. The signal came through on a Tuesday. Dr. Sarah Chin was in the middle of eating a sandwich when the alert went off on her workstation. She was 41 years old, lead astrophysicist at the Deep Space Monitoring Array in New Mexico, and she had been working the Tuesday morning shift for 11 years. In 11 years, the really exciting alerts had numbered exactly 0. Lots of interesting ones. Plenty of significant ones. But the kind that made your heart stop, 0. Until Tuesday. She set down her sandwich. The alert was coming from 3 of their deep space monitoring telescopes simultaneously, the kind of triangulated signal that the array's algorithms were specifically designed to flag. 3 instruments detecting the same anomaly from 3 different angles meant it was real. It meant it was not instrument error, not atmospheric interference, not a cosmic ray hit on a single detector. It meant something was actually there. Sarah pulled up the data on her main screen. Her fingers moved fast. She had been doing this long enough that reading raw telescope data was almost like reading text, a fluency built from 10,000 hours of practice. She scanned the numbers, looked at the triangulation, checked the frequency signature. Then she checked it again. Then she sat very still for approximately 15 seconds. Jake, she said without looking away from her screen. Jake Torres, her junior analyst, looked up from his own workstation across the room. He was 28, recently hired, still in the phase where he found every ordinary alert mildly exciting. Yeah. Come look at this. Something in her voice made him move fast. He crossed the room and stood behind her shoulder, looking at her screen. He was quiet for a moment. Those are 3 separate readings, he said. Yes. All pointing to the same. Yes. That's not, he stopped. Started again. That's not natural. Those energy signatures. That's not a star. It's not a pulsar. It's not. No, Sarah said. It's not. She was already reaching for her phone. The call went to the array director, Dr. Marcus Webb, who was at home having breakfast and who said, Sarah, it is 7 in the morning before she had finished her first sentence, and then said absolutely nothing else for the following 4 minutes while she talked. When she finished, there was a long silence. I'm coming in, he said. By 9 in the morning, there were 12 people in the monitoring room. By 11 there were 30. By 2 in the afternoon, the New Mexico facility had been quietly linked into a secure government network, and people in suits were arriving in black cars, and Dr. Sarah Chen was answering the same questions over and over again to people with increasingly impressive credentials and increasingly pale faces. By 6 in the evening the President of the United States knew. By 8 every major government on Earth knew. Not because anyone had announced it. Not because there had been a press conference or a leak or a dramatic emergency broadcast. But because the array data had been shared with partner facilities in Europe, Russia, China, Japan, and Australia, and every single one of those facilities had confirmed the same readings, and when you have that many governments looking at the same impossible data, the information moves very fast through channels that most people do not know exist. 3 large objects. Massive energy signatures. Moving in a coordinated pattern, not a natural formation. Not rocks, not ice, not gas. Structured. Deliberate. ships. 3 enormous ships, dropping out of something that looked very much like faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Dr. Sarah Chin did not go home that night. She did not go home for 3 days. She sat at her workstation and tracked the 3 objects as they moved, slowly at first, drifting in the outer system beyond Neptune's orbit, as if they were observing, or waiting, or both. For the first 36 hours they did nothing. Just drifted. Just watched. In that 36 hours, the world above Sarah's monitoring room went through something that no human being alive had ever experienced before, and that every human being since the beginning of civilization had wondered about. In those 36 hours, the world found out it was not alone. The announcement came from the United Nations, a joint statement from every major nation that had confirmed the readings. It was careful, measured, deliberately calm. It used phrases like unidentified objects of probable artificial origin and ongoing monitoring situation and no cause for public alarm at this time. It was, by every measure, the most significant announcement in the history of the human species, and it was delivered in the flattest, most bureaucratic language imaginable, because the people who wrote it understood that the words themselves were so enormous that any additional drama would have been like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning at 10,000 degrees. The world did not stay calm anyway. Sarah watched the news on a small screen in the corner of the monitoring room while she tracked the alien ships. She watched the crowds in the streets of 100 cities. She watched the religious gatherings and the protest marches and the people standing in their front yards looking up at the sky as if they expected to see something different up there. She watched the internet do what the internet did, explode into noise, half of it terror, half of it wild excitement, and all of it moving at a speed that made her head spin. She watched all of this and then she turned back to her data, because her data was the only thing she actually had any power over right now. And then on the second day the ships moved. They came in from the outer system in a slow, deliberate arc. Not fast. They could have crossed from Neptune's orbit to Earth in minutes if those energy signatures were any indication of what they were capable of. They did not. They came in slowly, which Sarah eventually understood was deliberate. They were showing themselves. They were giving Earth time to look at them, to see them coming, to understand. They were not hiding. They were announcing. By the time the 3 ships were close enough to observe in any real detail, still 300,000 kilometers out, not close enough to feel like immediate danger, but close enough for Earth's most powerful telescopes to get clear images, the whole world was watching. The images came through Sarah's own facility first, then spread to partner observatories, then to the world's media, then to every phone and television and computer screen on the planet simultaneously. 3 ships. Each one was enormous. The largest, the flagship Sarah's team had started calling it, was visibly the biggest. Their best estimates put it at approximately 12 kilometers in length. Not a ship in any human sense. More like a city that had been folded into a wedge shape and set to move through space. Dark metal. Or something that looked like dark metal, with running lights along its flanks in a deep amber color that was beautiful and alien and deeply unsettling all at once. The 2 sister ships were slightly smaller, 8 or 9 kilometers each, their best estimate. Same dark hull material. Same amber running lights. Sarah looked at the images for a long time. She was a scientist. She dealt in data. She was not, by nature, a person given to dramatic reactions or emotional displays. She had, over her career, learned to separate what she felt from what she observed, because the 2 things were not always useful to each other. But looking at those ships, those 3 enormous, alien deliberate ships moving in perfect formation toward her planet, Sarah Chin felt something she had not felt since she was very small. She felt the specific and profound smallness of being one person, on one world, that was just one world among uncountable others. She sat with that feeling for a moment. Then she went back to work. The ships stopped at 150,000 kilometers. Not close enough to be directly threatening, they were roughly at the distance of the moon though on a different orbital plane. Close enough to be seen with the naked eye on a clear night, if you knew where to look. 3 amber lights in the darkness. Steady. Unmoving. Waiting. For 6 hours they waited. Then they made contact. It was not a dramatic transmission. No visual. No dramatic alien face on every screen. Just a signal, structured, mathematical, unmistakably intentional, broadcast on a frequency that Earth's own deep space monitoring equipment could receive clearly. The signal contained a mathematical sequence first. Primes. The simplest possible proof that whoever was sending it understood numbers the same way humans did. Then it shifted, and it shifted into something that took Earth's combined translation teams 4 hours to confirm was actually a message in English. Not perfect English. Heavily accented, in a sense, The patterns were slightly off, the syntax occasionally strange. But English. Clearly derived from English. Which meant they had been listening to human broadcasts long enough to learn the language. Which meant they had been out there listening for a while. The message, stripped of its technical transmission noise, said, "People of the third planet of this system. We are the Galactic Dominion. We come in the authority of the High Command and the Dominion Council. We have observed your world and determined that contact is appropriate at this time. We wish to discuss the terms of your integration into the Galactic Dominion. We mean no harm to those who cooperate. We will transmit detailed communication protocols in the next transmission. Prepare your response." Sarah Chin read the translated message on her screen 3 times. Then she looked at the 3 amber lights in the darkness and said very quietly to no one in particular, "Terms of integration. Not hello. Not we come in peace. Not greetings from the stars. Terms of integration." Jake Torres was sitting beside her. He had also read the message. He was 28 years old and he had grown up watching science fiction movies where the aliens always said something like "we come in peace" or "take us to your leader" or, in the scary ones, "resistance is futile." He looked at the 3 amber lights. "That's not a greeting," he said. "That's a demand." "Yes," Sarah said. "They want us to just join them? Like we have no choice?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. She thought about the size of those ships. 12 kilometers. The kind of engineering that implied. The kind of civilization that could build something like that and fly at 40 light years. She thought about the phrase "terms of integration." She thought about the fact that they had not said "if you agree" or "should you wish to" or any other phrase that implied a choice was being offered. She thought about 100 other things, very fast, in the way that her mind worked when it was processing something important. Then she said, "Get me a secure line to the UN coordination team. And get Dr. Webb. And somebody needs to get the Secretary General on the phone because the next message we send back is going to matter a great deal, and we need to get it right." She was already typing. Earth's response took 11 hours to compose. 11 hours of argument and negotiation and revision among the leaders and scientists and diplomats of every major nation on the planet. 11 hours of debate about tone, too aggressive? Too submissive? Too eager? Too cold? 11 hours of fighting over words, because words were the only weapon they currently had. The final message was short. Shorter than many had wanted. Longer than some had insisted. It said, "To the Galactic Dominion. We have received your message and we understand your intent. We are willing to discuss. We propose a meeting between representatives of Earth and representatives of your fleet, to be held at a mutually agreed location, for the purpose of understanding each other's positions. We believe that any agreement of lasting value must be reached through mutual discussion, not dictated terms. We look forward to your response." It was diplomatic. It was careful. It was, most importantly, clear about one thing. Earth was not simply going to roll over and accept terms of integration without a conversation. Whether the Dominion would find that interesting or whether they would find it amusing, or whether they would find it irrelevant and simply proceed to demonstrate their firepower, that, Sarah thought, watching the message go out, was the question. She looked at the 3 amber lights. She really hoped humanity wasn't about to do something catastrophically stupid. Varric read the human response 3 times. The first time he read it quickly, the way he read routine communications. The second time he read it slowly, paying attention to the translation notes his linguistics team had added in brackets. The third time he read it with Subcommander Leth standing beside him, both of them going through it line by line. "We believe that any agreement of lasting value must be reached through mutual discussion, not dictated terms." "Interesting phrasing," Leth said. Varric set down the data tablet. He walked to the observation window. The blue-green planet filled the lower half of the view now. They were close enough that its continents were visible, its ocean basins clearly defined, its cloud systems swirling in beautiful white patterns across its surface. It looked healthy. Alive. Full. "They are not afraid," he said. "Their message suggests caution more than confidence, High Commander." "No." Varric shook his head. He had been in this business long enough, the business of making other species afraid of the Dominion, to know what fear looked like in a message. Fear was excessive politeness. Fear was immediate agreement. Fear was rapid questions about what cooperation would look like, how life would change, what they needed to do. Fear was a species immediately trying to find the fastest way to safety. The humans were not doing any of that. They were doing something he had almost never seen. They were negotiating. Not from a position of power, they couldn't possibly know enough about the Dominion yet to feel confident. Not from ignorance. Their message showed they had clearly understood the implications of his first transmission. But from something else. Some quality he was turning over in his mind, trying to name. Dignity, he thought. They were negotiating with dignity. Pull up everything we have on human history, he said. Leth blinked. That is a large dataset, High Commander. Military history specifically. Conflicts between human nations. How they fight each other. He turned from the window. I want to understand what they are like when they are in a corner. The historians and analysts worked through the night cycle of the ship. Varric did not sleep. He sat in his briefing room and read reports. What he learned about human military history did not make him feel better. The humans had been fighting each other more or less continuously for their entire recorded history. 10,000 years of conflict. Tribe against tribe, city against city, nation against nation. They had developed weapons of almost every possible variety, many of them uniquely brutal and creative. They had fought wars on land, on water, underwater, in the air, and more recently in space. They had fought wars over territory, over resources, over ideas, over religion, over pride, over things so small they would have seemed laughable if the death tolls hadn't been so enormous. They had fought wars with sticks and stones and ended up at nuclear weapons in roughly 10,000 years. Nuclear weapons in 10,000 years. The Keth had taken 40,000 years to get there. Most species took 20 to 30,000 years. And the humans had not stopped at nuclear weapons. They had kept going. Chemical weapons. Biological weapons. Electromagnetic pulse weapons. Directed energy weapons. Autonomous weapons systems that could make targeting decisions without human input. They had developed the concept of cyber warfare, attacks that targeted the computational infrastructure of an opponent, to a degree that, according to Ress's analysis, the Dominion had not yet achieved. All of this while fighting each other. Varric sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The Keth had unified their planet 4,000 years ago. In those 4,000 years of unified civilization, they had developed their military technology substantially, but mostly in the direction of the technologies useful for controlling and deterring other species. Space warfare. Planetary bombardment. Fleet tactics. The humans had never unified. They were still, according to the intelligence his team had gathered, divided into over 150 separate nations, many of them actively hostile to each other. They had never stopped fighting. They had never had a period of long peace in which military development slowed. They had been developing weapons for 10,000 years without stopping. Not in a focused, organized, state-directed way. Not with the Dominion's methodical scientific bureaucracy and long-term planning. But in a chaotic, competitive, constantly pressurized way, 150 nations each trying to have weapons that no one else could match, each stealing ideas from the others, each pushing boundaries the others had found, each one forced by the constant threat of its neighbors to keep developing, keep improving, keep pushing. It was, Varric realized, the most brutally efficient weapons development environment imaginable. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because it was what happened when a species spent 10,000 years trying to kill each other and got very, very good at it. He thought about the quantum computing technology Ress had described, the biological engineering, the materials science. He thought about a species that had been in a permanent arms race with itself for 10,000 years suddenly turning all of that competitive, pressurized, chaotic innovation outward. Toward the stars. Toward whoever was up there. Varric stood up abruptly. He went to his communications console and opened a channel to Leth. Sub-Commander. What is the current status of our weapon systems? Pause. All systems operational, High Commander. Standard readiness. Bring them to full readiness. All 3 ships. I want everything active and online within the hour. Another pause longer. Yes, sir. May I ask what has prompted? Read the historical analysis report that my team has been compiling, Varric said. Read all of it. And then ask me again if you need to. He closed the channel. He stood in the middle of his briefing room and thought about humans. About 10,000 years of constant war. About a species that had never known peace long enough to get comfortable. About what that kind of pressure, relentless, unending, existential competitive pressure, did to a species' instincts. It made them clever, he thought. It made them dangerously clever. And then a thought occurred to him that he had never had before, in 112 first contacts. He thought, what if they're already ready for us? He dismissed the thought immediately. They were pre-interstellar. They had no FTL travel. Their ships were tiny, fragile things held together with what his engineers had described charitably as primitive materials technology. They had never encountered another spacefaring species. They could not possibly be prepared for the Dominion. He dismissed the thought. But it came back. And it kept coming back. The meeting was arranged for the following day. A neutral location, a point in space approximately halfway between the human space station, which was called the International Space Station, a name Varek's linguistics team confirmed was simply descriptive, and the Dominion fleet. A small Dominion shuttle would carry Varek and a delegation of 4 officers. The humans would send their own shuttle, a primitive chemical propellant vehicle that Varek's engineers privately described as endearingly fragile, carrying their own representatives. Varek's team had debated whether to meet aboard the Dominion shuttle instead, where the psychological advantage of the Dominion's superior technology would be immediately clear. Varek had overruled them. He wanted to meet in open space in neutral vessels, with nothing between the delegations but the cold of the void. He wanted to look these humans in the eyes. He wanted to see what he was dealing with. The human shuttle arrived on time. This was the first thing that surprised Varek. Punctuality was, in his experience, not universal among pre-interstellar species encountering the Dominion for the first time. The Murthek had been late by 6 hours because half their delegation had been prostrate with what translated roughly as religious terror. The Yun had sent their shuttle to the wrong coordinates twice before getting it right. The Preth, who were now 108 of the Dominion's 112 species, had not sent anyone at all for the first 3 scheduled meetings, until Varek's predecessor had moved a dreadnought into close orbit of their planet and transmitted what could be translated only as "try again." The humans arrived on time. The shuttle was, as advertised, a primitive thing. A white cylinder with a blunt nose and small chemical thrusters, moving through space with a solidity that belied its fragility. But it moved precisely. It matched the Dominion shuttle's position cleanly, without the overcorrection errors that primitive docking systems usually produced. Whoever was flying it was good. The airlock connected. Varek and his 4 officers waited in the small central compartment of the Dominion shuttle. The hatch opened. 4 humans came through. Varek had, of course, seen images of humans in their broadcast. He had prepared himself intellectually for their appearance. He had told himself it would not be surprising. He was slightly wrong. They were smaller than he had expected, though not small by any standard. The tallest of the 4 stood at roughly the same height as an average Keth, perhaps 2 meters, with the broad-shouldered build that the anatomical studies had prepared him for. They were bipedal, bilaterally symmetric, with the forward-facing binocular eyes of a predator species. Their skin tones varied. One was very pale, one was a medium brown, one was a darker brown, one was what a human broadcast he had watched called East Asian, a particular physical variation that occurred in a specific geographic region of their planet. What he had not prepared himself for was the way they moved. It was not aggressive. It was not submissive. It was measured, controlled. Each of them moved with the specific, deliberate economy of motion that Varek had only ever seen before in trained soldiers. Not stiff, not robotic, just precise. Aware. The kind of movement that came from a being who was alert without showing it, who was ready without advertising readiness. All 4 of them had that quality. He looked at their faces. The pale one was a woman, female, he corrected himself, using the human terminology, perhaps 50 years old by the human aging scale, with hair the color of iron and eyes the color of deep water. She was looking at Varek with an expression he could not immediately read. Not fear. Not awe. Something more complex. The one in the middle was male, perhaps 60, with gray hair cut short and the careful posture of someone who had been in military service for a long time. He was looking at the Dominion shuttle's interior with the quick, assessing sweep of a tactician taking inventory of a room. The darker-skinned one, also female, was young, perhaps 35. She was looking directly at Varek. Not at the shuttle. Not at the other Dominion officers. At Varek. With a directness that was, by Keth standards, almost rude, and by some quality Varek couldn't name, also completely without hostility. The 4th was male, perhaps 45, with a calm face and the kind of stillness that suggested either deep confidence or deep training or both. They were, Varek thought, not what he had expected. The pale woman spoke first. "High Commander Varek," she said. Her pronunciation of his name was slightly off. The tonal component of the second syllable didn't quite land right, but she had clearly made an effort to learn it. "I am Ambassador Margaret Walsh, representing the United Nations of Earth. This is General James Harlow, Dr. Priya Anand, and Colonel David Osei." Pause. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Varek studied her. "You have learned my name," he said. His English was assembled from the translation algorithms, slightly mechanical but functional. "We have learned a great deal," Walsh said without inflection. Varek almost smiled. "Shall we sit?" he said. They sat. And the most consequential conversation in the history of 2 civilizations began. The negotiation table was a folding surface in the center of the Dominion shuttle. It was not an impressive table. It was functional, a flat gray surface with seats on either side, simple lighting above, the faint hum of the shuttle's life support systems in the background. Nothing more. But for what was set across it, it might as well have been the most important table in the history of either species. Varric began the way he always began with new species. Calmly. Clearly. Without deception, because deception was not necessary when your position was as powerful as the Dominion's. He explained the Galactic Dominion. Its history, its structure, its scope. 112 species. 4,000 years. A governance system that provided stability, protection, and technological exchange to every member world. He described the benefits of integration. Access to Dominion science, Dominion medicine, Dominion infrastructure. Protection from the dangers of deep space. The threats that a pre-interstellar species had no idea existed but that the Dominion navigated routinely. He described the requirements of integration as well. Honest about that too. There would be a governance transition. Earth's current political structures would need to adapt to Dominion administrative requirements. There would be a period of assessment, during which Dominion personnel would be present on Earth. There would be resource contributions expected from Earth's economy. He laid it all out. Clear. Comprehensive. When he finished, there was a silence. Then Ambassador Walsh said, "How many of your 112 member species joined voluntarily?" Varric blinked his 3 eyes. It was an unusual question. Most species, when he finished his opening presentation, asked about the resource contributions or about the timeline or, most commonly, about what would happen if they declined. No one usually went for the voluntary question first. Many species, he said, understood the wisdom of joining the Dominion when the benefits were explained. That's a diplomatic answer, Walsh said. How many said yes before you showed them your ships? Pause. The Dominion's peaceful intentions are demonstrated by the fact that we are here talking rather than. Rather than what? This came from Dr. Anand, the young one, the one who had been watching him directly. Her voice was measured but her eyes were sharp. Rather than what, High Commander? What is the alternative you're implying? Varric looked at her. Dr. Anand. You said rather than, and then you stopped. I'm asking you to finish the sentence. She tilted her head slightly. Because I think we all know what you were going to say. And I think it would be more productive if we were honest with each other about the actual choice you're offering us. There was a moment of silence. General Harlow, the military man, had not moved or spoken yet. He was still doing what he had been doing since he sat down, looking at things. The shuttle walls. The Dominion officers. The equipment visible through the doorway to the cockpit. Cataloging. Varric found Harlow more unsettling than the diplomat or the scientist. The Dominion, Varric said carefully, does not destroy what it can absorb productively. So it destroys what it can't? Colonel Osei said. His voice was perfectly even. That is not what I said. But it's what you meant. Walsh leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively, just closing the distance enough to make the conversation feel more direct. High Commander, we are not naive. We understand that 3 ships of the size and capability you have brought here represent a military force far beyond anything we can match right now. We understand that your Dominion has absorbed 112 species, and that very few of them probably said yes purely out of enthusiasm. Pause. What we are asking you to understand is that we are not going to pretend that a choice made under those circumstances is a free choice. And we are not going to sign an agreement that frames it as one. Varric looked at her for a long moment. What are you proposing instead? He asked. Time, Walsh said. An honest conversation. She folded her hands on the table. We are not refusing to engage with the Galactic Dominion. We are not declaring war or making threats we cannot back up. We are saying that we would like to have a real discussion. About mutual interests, about what membership in your Dominion would actually mean for our people, about what we might offer each other. Not as a subject species and an empire. As 2 civilizations that have just discovered each other. The shuttle hummed. Varric looked at these 4 humans. At their quiet, alert, undaunted faces. He thought about the reports he had read. About 10,000 years of human warfare. About the rate of their technological development. About quantum computing and unified field theory and biological engineering. He thought about the fact that they had arrived on time. He thought about the fact that not one of them was afraid. He said, what could you possibly offer the Galactic Dominion that we do not already have? And Dr. Priya Anand said very calmly, would you like a list? The list took the rest of the meeting. Varric had told himself he was asking a rhetorical question. He had not expected an actual answer. He had certainly not expected the answer to take 90 minutes and leave him sitting in a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Dr. Anand was a physicist. Not a diplomat, not a politician, not a soldier. A scientist. And she talked to Varric the way a scientist talks to another scientist. Not with the careful political language of Walsh, not with the measured assessment of Harlow or Osei, but with the direct, unembellished precision of someone describing what is real. She talked about quantum computing first. About the architecture that the Dominion's science analysts had flagged as ahead of their own theoretical work. She described what it could do, what it would be able to do within a decade based on their current development trajectory. The kinds of calculations it enabled. The encryption it could break. The material simulations it could run. The biological modeling it could perform. Then she talked about something called CRISPR, a biological engineering technique the humans had developed that allowed direct, precise editing of genetic material. She described what it had already done, the elimination of inherited diseases, the development of new agricultural crops, the beginning of what she called regenerative medicine. She described where it was going. Then she talked about what she called metamaterials, engineered materials with properties that did not exist in nature, designed at the atomic level for specific functions. Varric's science team had mentioned these in passing but had not fully understood the human applications. Anand made them understand. Then she described something that Varric had no frame of reference for at all. Something the humans called artificial general intelligence. She described it carefully, acknowledging that it was still in early stages, still being developed, still being debated and studied and carefully controlled. But she described what it was. A computational system that could reason across domains, that could learn without being specifically taught, that could generate solutions to problems its designers had never anticipated. When she finished describing it, the Dominion shuttle was very quiet. Varric's 4 officers were looking at each other with the carefully neutral faces of people who were trying very hard not to show what they were actually thinking. Varric was looking at Anand. "How long," he said slowly, "have you had this artificial general intelligence?" "We don't have it yet," she said. "We have early versions. Narrow systems that approach it in limited domains. Broader systems that are being developed." She paused. "But High Commander, and I want to be honest with you about this, the trajectory of our computational technology suggests that what we are calling artificial general intelligence is not a question of if. It is a question of when. And when? 10 years, she said. Maybe 15. Probably not 30. Another pause. And that is with our current rate of development. With access to the resources and infrastructure of an interstellar civilization. She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Varric sat back. He thought about what an artificial general intelligence, a machine that could reason, learn, and generate solutions without specific training, would mean in the hands of a species that had been developing weapons for 10,000 years. What it would mean for materials science, for physics, for biology, for space travel. He thought about the human development curve. 300 years to match 4,000 years of Dominion science. He thought about what would happen if that curve continued. Or accelerated. He looked at Anand. At Walsh. At Harlow still cataloging. At Osei perfectly still. He said, "You are telling me these things deliberately." "Yes," Walsh said. "Why?" Walsh looked at him calmly. "Because the Dominion came here to absorb us. And we are trying to show you that absorbing us might not be the best use of what we are. That there might be something more valuable available, if you're willing to consider a different kind of relationship." Varric was quiet for a long moment. "I will need to consult with the Dominion Council," he said. "Of course," Walsh said. They adjourned. The humans returned to their shuttle. The hatch closed. Varric watched through the small porthole as the white cylinder moved away, turning on its thrusters with that same precise, efficient competence. He turned to his officers. "Well," he said. Subcommander Leth was the first to speak. "The scientist," she said. "The one who gave the list. Dr. Anand." "She was not boasting," Leth said. "She was not exaggerating for negotiation purposes. She was describing facts, as she understands them." Varric nodded. "The general," he said nothing the entire meeting. "No," Leth agreed. But he was listening to everything. Varric looked at the porthole at the retreating human shuttle. He was looking at our equipment. At our weapon systems. At the structural layout of the shuttle. At our officers. He was building a picture. "Yes, sir. He is not a diplomat. He is not a scientist." Varric paused. "He is the one they brought to assess us militarily." And he spent the entire meeting in silence, gathering information. Leth was quiet. What does that tell you? Varric said. Leth thought carefully. It tells me, she said slowly, that they came to this meeting with two objectives. The diplomat was objective 1, make the case for a negotiated relationship. The scientist was objective 2, demonstrate their value. But the general? She paused. The general was a third objective they did not announce. Which was? Understanding us, Leth said. Not just talking to us. Not just impressing us. Understanding us. What we have. How we think. What our capabilities actually are. She met Varric's eyes. They are already preparing for what comes after this conversation. Varric nodded slowly. Prepare my transmission to the Dominion Council, he said. And Leth. Sir? Tell Ress I want everything. Every human science paper, every military document, every technology patent, every research program. Everything we can access from their public broadcasts, and everything our signals team can decode from their encrypted channels. I want a complete picture by the time the council responds. Yes, High Commander. He turned back to the porthole. The human shuttle was almost too small to see now, a white speck against the black. What are you? He thought again. This time the question felt different. More urgent. More real. This time he was starting to get an answer. And the answer was not making him comfortable. The transmission took 8 days to reach the Dominion Council. The council was seated on Keth Prime, the homeworld of the Keth, and the capital of the Galactic Dominion's 4,000-year empire. It was a planet of ancient cities and deliberate order, a world where the streets had not changed significantly in 1,000 years because the Keth believed that a civilization which needed to constantly rebuild its surroundings was a civilization that had not yet achieved proper stability. The High Council chamber was a vast circular room at the center of the capital, its walls carved from a single piece of native stone, its ceiling open to the amber sky of Keth Prime. Around a circular table sat 12 counselors, each representing one of the 12 administrative sectors of the Dominion. They were all old. The Keth lived long lives, and the council was a body that rewarded experience above almost everything else. The youngest counselor was 240 years old. They received Varric's transmission in formal session. They listened to it twice. Then they sat in silence for a long time. High Counselor Vareth, who was 390 years old and who had presided over the absorption of 37 species in her tenure, spoke first. He is recommending a provisional arrangement, she said. Not full integration. A provisional arrangement, pending further assessment. Unprecedented, said Counselor Ometh. He was the youngest of the 12, only 240, and he had the impatience of someone who had not yet seen enough history to be properly afraid of repeating it. We do not do provisional arrangements. We integrate or we do not. The protocol is clear. The protocol was written when we had no species that presented this kind of profile, said Counselor Dress, who was old even by Keth standards and who had the slightly distant quality of a being who spent most of their time thinking about things that had happened a long time ago. Varric is not wrong to flag this as unusual. What exactly is unusual about it? Ometh pressed. They are pre-interstellar. They have no fleet. They have no weapons capable of threatening our ships. They are, in every practical sense, helpless. The protocol exists precisely for situations like this. The protocol, Dress said, assumes a species whose technological development is consistent with their spacefaring status. The humans are not consistent. They have the spacefaring status of a Class 4 species and the technological understanding of a Class 1. Then we absorb them and we use what they know, Ometh said. That is, if I understand correctly, the literal point of integration. The point of integration, Dress said, is to add stable, manageable members to the Dominion. Members who are grateful for Dominion protection. Members who are not, she paused, choosing her word carefully, a variable. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Vareth looked around the table. The specific concern Varric has flagged is their rate of development. He describes it as, she consulted her notes, accelerating in a way inconsistent with any species in our historical records. He notes that their theoretical scientific knowledge significantly exceeds their practical application, which means they are, in his assessment, in a brief window before their theory becomes technology at a rate we may find difficult to predict. Difficult to predict, Ometh repeated flatly. High Commander Varric is telling us that a pre-interstellar species with no space fleet and no weapons capable of threatening a Dominion scout ship is difficult to predict? He is telling us more than that, Vareth said. She pulled up the specific section of the transmission. He says, The humans have achieved theoretical mastery of disciplines that took the Dominion 3,000 years to develop, and they appear to have done it in approximately 300. More significantly, their development is not slowing, it is compounding. Each generation of their science builds on the previous at an increasing rate. Based on the analysis my team has prepared, if the humans are left to develop independently for another 100 years, their technological capabilities will be, at minimum, comparable to the Dominion's current level, and possibly significantly beyond it. The chamber was very quiet. He wrote that in a formal transmission to this council? Omith said. He did. He is saying that a species of primitive rocket travelers who have not yet left their own solar system will surpass the Galactic Dominion in 100 years. He is saying it is possible. Vareth set down her notes. He is recommending that we do not treat them as a standard integration subject. He is recommending a provisional arrangement, limited engagement, monitored access, a period of assessment, while we determine how best to proceed. And if they refuse the provisional arrangement? Omith asked. If they decline to cooperate? Varric notes, Vareth said, that demonstrating force is an option. He does not, however, recommend it as a first response. Why not? We have 3 dreadnoughts at their system. Dress spoke. Her voice was dry and tired and very old. Because, Omith, if Varric is correct about their development curve, then destroying humanity now is one option, and it is the simplest option, and it removes the variable entirely. She paused. But if Varric is wrong, if their development is even further along than his analysts believe, then destroying humanity now and making an enemy of everything they have already built and everything their allies and sympathizers would do in response, may not go as smoothly as our 3 dreadnoughts suggest. Silence. We do not know what we do not know, Dress said. That is Varric's core concern. And I find myself, in this very old body that has seen a great many things, agreeing with him. Vareth looked around the table. The council will deliberate. We will send Varric our decision within 5 days. The decision, when it came, was a compromise. The council authorized Varric to pursue a provisional arrangement with humanity, with specific conditions. A period of not more than 1 standard Dominion year, during which Dominion observers would be permitted limited access to human facilities, during which human technology would be assessed and documented, and during which the terms of eventual full integration would be negotiated. If the provisional arrangement produced a satisfactory integration agreement within 1 year, the integration would proceed. If not, the Council reserved the right to proceed with Standard Protocol. Standard Protocol meant a demonstration of force sufficient to compel compliance. Varric read the Council's response carefully. He noted the specific phrase Standard Protocol, and what it meant. He noted the 1-year timeline. He noted the clause about Dominion observers having access to human facilities. He also noted something the Council had not explicitly said but that was clearly present between the lines of their decision. They were afraid. The Dominion Council was 4,000 years old. It had absorbed 112 species. It had faced resistance from some of them and overwhelmed that resistance without significant difficulty. And it was, quietly, carefully, in language wrapped in bureaucratic layers so thick that you had to know how to read it to find the fear underneath. It was afraid of what 100 years of uninterrupted human development might produce. Varric transmitted his acceptance to the Council and then called a full staff briefing. We are beginning the provisional arrangement, he told his officers. 1 year. Our job in that year is to understand these humans completely. I want to know what they know. I want to know what they are working on. I want to know what they are capable of. He looked around the briefing room. And I want to know what they are not showing us, he said. Because I guarantee you there is something they are not showing us. He was right. He just didn't know yet how right he was. The provisional arrangement was announced publicly on Earth 12 days after the first contact meeting. It was the most watched broadcast in human history. 8 billion people tuned in, a number that included not just the obvious populations of the developed world, but people in remote villages watching on small shared screens, people on fishing boats with satellite connections, people in hospitals and schools and offices and living rooms and cars pulled over to the side of roads because they needed to hear this. Ambassador Walsh gave the announcement. She was clear. She was calm. She explained what had happened, what had been discussed, what had been agreed to. She used simple language because the most important news in human history deserved to be understood by every human being, not just the ones who worked in government or science. The Galactic Dominion was real. It was here. It contained 112 other species. It was proposing that Earth join it. For 1 year, Earth and the Dominion would talk. Learn from each other. Earth would allow Dominion observers limited access to certain facilities. The Dominion fleet would remain in the solar system, but would maintain its current position and would not approach Earth without advance notice and agreement. "This is not a surrender," Walsh said, and her voice was steady. "This is not a capitulation. This is the beginning of a conversation between our world and a civilization that is far older and far larger than ours. We go into this conversation with our eyes open, with our values intact, and with the full knowledge of what our options are if this conversation does not go where we need it to go." She paused. "We are not naive," she said. "We are not afraid. And we are not alone." That last line was the one that the news networks replayed the most. And it was technically true. Earth was not alone. It was now formally in communication with an interstellar civilization. But Walsh had also meant something else by it, and the people who had been briefed on certain things understood that she had meant something else. Earth was not alone in a more literal sense. Because what the Dominion had not discovered yet, what Varek's analysts had not found in their 6 weeks of monitoring human broadcasts, because it was not in the broadcasts, because it was classified at the highest levels of every major government, was that humanity had been preparing for this possibility for 30 years. Not specifically. Not with full knowledge of what the Galactic Dominion was. But with the general understanding shared among the world's top theoretical scientists and certain government agencies, that the development of faster-than-light travel by any civilization in the galaxy was, statistically speaking, given the age of the universe, almost certainly not unique to humanity. That the quiet of space was a puzzle. That the puzzle had a solution. And that the solution was probably not that humanity was alone. The program was called Project Kepler internally, named for the astronomer who had first mathematically described the motion of planets. It had begun 31 years ago as a joint initiative between several governments that had quietly agreed behind closed doors that the question was not if but when, and that when they were found, it would be better to have been preparing than to have been waiting. Project Kepler had 4 branches. Branch 1 was the obvious one: detection and monitoring. Arrays designed to identify evidence of technological civilizations in the galaxy. The Deep Space Monitoring Array in New Mexico, where Dr. Sarah Chin worked, was part of this branch. It was the branch that had found the Dominion fleet. Branch 2 was communication. Languages, mathematics, signal theory. The teams that had been working for decades on how to communicate with a non-human intelligence, what frameworks to use, what assumptions to discard. Ambassador Walsh's entire diplomatic background had been developed in close consultation with Branch 2. Branch 3 was science and technology. A long-term, coordinated research effort to push the boundaries of human science as fast as possible, with the specific understanding that any species capable of traveling between stars would be, by definition, technologically superior to humanity in at least some areas, and that the best preparation was to close the gap as much as possible before contact occurred. Dr. Anand was a senior researcher in Branch 3. The list she had given Varek in the shuttle was the public-facing portion of Branch 3's achievements. The non-public portion was considerably more extensive. Branch 4 was defense. General James Harlow ran Branch 4. Harlow had said almost nothing during the meeting with Varek. That was because he had not gone to the meeting to talk. He had gone to observe. And he had observed carefully the shuttle's construction, its materials, the visible weapon systems through the forward compartment door, the power signatures his equipment had been quietly measuring through the meeting, the physical characteristics of the Dominion officers, the way they held themselves, the subtle indicators of their psychology. He had come away from the meeting with a great deal of information. He had also come away with a clear assessment of one thing: the Dominion was treating humanity like a problem to be managed, not like a threat. Not yet. They were being careful, more careful than Harlow had expected, but their baseline assumption was still control, that eventually, one way or another, Earth would be absorbed. The only question in Varek's mind, Harlow assessed, was how smoothly it could be done. That assessment gave Harlow something he had not expected to have: time. Not much. Not forever. But time. He used it. In the 32 days between the first contact meeting and the arrival of the first Dominion observer team, Harlow did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. He was 62 years old, which was not young, but he had spent 40 years in military service and 8 years running Branch 4, and he had the specific kind of stamina that comes from a person who has spent their entire adult life preparing for exactly one moment and has just been told the moment is here. He coordinated. He activated programs that had been in standby mode for years. He made phone calls to people in 12 countries and said specific words that meant specific things. He reviewed timelines, adjusted priorities, redirected resources. Branch 4 had been building things. Not everything was complete. Some things were still in prototype stage. Some things had not been tested in real conditions. Some things were theoretical still, despite Branch 3's best efforts. But some things were ready. And some things, Harlow thought, reviewing the last 31 years of his life's work, were going to be very difficult for the Galactic Dominion to process. He sat in his office on the night before the Dominion observer team was due to arrive and looked at a photograph on his desk. It was a photograph of Earth from space. One of the classic images, the one called the blue marble, taken by an astronaut decades ago. A small blue sphere in a vast black nothing. He had kept that photo on his desk for 30 years. He thought about Varric. About those 3 amber eyes and the careful, controlled way the High Commander had conducted the meeting. About the moment when Dr. Anand had started explaining artificial general intelligence and the almost imperceptible change that had come over Varric's face. The controlled, professional suppression of something that Harlow, who had spent 40 years reading people, was fairly confident was alarm. Good, Harlow had thought, watching that suppressed alarm. Good. You should be alarmed. Because what Anand had described was the publicly available information. The stuff that anyone following human news could eventually piece together. The theoretical work that was already in academic journals. What she had not described, what no one outside of Branch 3 and Branch 4 and a very small number of heads of state knew about, was the work that had been done in the programs that didn't have academic journals. The programs that didn't have press releases. The programs that existed in facilities that weren't on any public map, funded by budget lines that didn't appear under their real names, staffed by people whose job descriptions said something completely different. Harlow looked at the blue marble. HFY, he said softly. The phrase had come from a translation brief, a phrase that meant, roughly, now it's our turn. He had picked it up somewhere and it had stuck. He turned off his desk light and went to get 4 hours of sleep. Tomorrow the Dominion was coming to look. Harlow intended to be very careful about what they saw. The Dominion observer team consisted of 12 members. Varric had chosen them personally. 4 scientists, specialists in physics, biology, materials science, and computation. 3 military analysts, 2 administrators, a linguistics specialist, a cultural analyst, and Lieutenant Commander Sarrett, who was Varric's most trusted intelligence officer and who was, officially, the team's diplomatic liaison. Sarrett's actual job was to find out what the humans were not showing them. She was very good at her actual job. She was also, by Keth standards, young, barely 80 years old, which meant she had the adaptability and quick pattern recognition of a mind that had not yet hardened into fixed frameworks. She had been Varric's intelligence officer for 15 years and had never failed to eventually find what she was looking for. The observer team landed at an airport in Geneva, Switzerland. This was the humans' choice. Switzerland, they explained, was historically considered a neutral territory in human international politics. The choice of landing site was itself a message. The humans understood political symbolism and were using it deliberately. The team was met by a human delegation led by Dr. Anand and Colonel Osei. Sarrett watched the 2 humans carefully as they crossed the tarmac. Dr. Anand moved with the quick energy of a scientist who had too many things to think about and not quite enough time for all of them. Osei moved differently, with the same controlled, measured quality that Sarrett had noticed in General Harlow during the briefing recordings. The quality of someone who was never entirely off duty. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Anand said, and she was smiling. Sarrett had studied human facial expressions, the pulling back of the lip muscles to expose teeth, which signaled warmth and welcome in this species rather than aggression, which it might signal in others. "I hope the transit was comfortable." "It was satisfactory," said the team lead, Science Director Ven. "Thank you for receiving us." "Of course." Anand looked at the team with clear curiosity, a curiosity that, Sarrett noticed, she did not attempt to hide. "We have a full schedule ready. I'd like to start with a tour of the European Particle Research Facility this afternoon, if the team is willing." "A particle accelerator?" Ven said, consulting his notes. "Yes, we have decoded reference to this facility in your public broadcast. We would be interested." Sarrett said nothing. She was looking at the airport around them. At the construction of the buildings, the materials, the engineering. At the vehicles moving across the tarmac. At the humans who were operating the various airport systems, their movements, their equipment. She was building her own picture the way Harlow had built his. She had a list of things to look for. And she had a list of things that, based on her analysis of human broadcasts and her own extensive experience, might be being kept from them. The particle accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider as it was called, was impressive. This surprised the Dominion science team, which had come expecting to see something primitive. The LHC was not primitive. It was, by any reasonable measure, an extraordinary piece of engineering. A circular tunnel 27 kilometers in circumference, buried underground, in which subatomic particles were accelerated to speeds approaching the speed of light and then smashed together so that their constituent parts could be observed. The energy scales involved, the precision of the magnetic systems that guided the particles, the sensitivity of the detectors that recorded the results. None of these were what the Dominion team had expected from a pre-interstellar species. Science Director Venn was quiet for most of the tour. His team asked technical questions that Dr. Anand answered thoroughly, clearly, without visible evasion. Everything they were shown was real. Everything they were told was true. But Sarat, walking slightly behind the group, was noticing something. The humans were very good at tours. They had the tour prepared. They knew exactly what to show, in what order, at what level of detail. They anticipated questions. They answered fully, openly, with apparent enthusiasm for sharing. They created a powerful impression of transparency, which made Sarat wonder, professionally and persistently, what they were not showing. She began keeping a second list. Not of what she saw but of what was absent. Equipment that, given the facility's stated purpose and capabilities, should have been present. Staff whose roles implied access to systems she wasn't being shown. Doors that were closed in a facility where almost every door was open. Questions that her colleagues asked, answered smoothly, but which prompted no offer of a practical demonstration. She noted everything. That night, in the hotel in Geneva where the observer team was staying, she wrote up her observations and transmitted them on a secure channel to Varek. Hi Commander. First day of observation complete. Summary as follows. The facilities we were shown are genuine and impressive. I have no doubt that what we were shown is real. However, I want to flag 3 categories of absence. First, the computational infrastructure of this facility is significantly more extensive than what we were shown access to. I observed data connections to systems that were not included in our tour. Second, there was a security perimeter within the facility that was politely but consistently maintained. We were never taken below the 3rd sublevel, despite the fact that the facility extends to at least a 7th. Third, Colonel Osei, who accompanied us throughout the day, spent the entire time watching our team's reactions rather than explaining the facility. He spoke very little. He watched very much. This is consistent with my previous assessment. The humans use their military personnel as observers in social situations. They are studying us as carefully as we are studying them. Recommend continued careful engagement. She sent the report and lay back on the human bed, softer than she was used to, an interesting cultural detail about a species that seemed to value physical comfort, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow they were going to the space agency facility in Houston, Texas. She had read everything she could find about what was publicly known about the Houston facility. What she had found in the public record was, by any measure, substantial. What she suspected might be below the public record was what she couldn't stop thinking about. Houston was warm. Sarat had not been prepared for the heat. The Keth homeworld was considerably cooler on average, and even knowing intellectually that Earth's equatorial regions were warmer had not prepared her for stepping off the transport and being hit by air that felt, to her temperature-sensitive skin, almost liquid. Dr. Anand was already smiling at whatever was on Sarat's face. The humidity takes some getting used to, she said. Can I get you something to drink? I am fine, Sarat said, which was not precisely true. The space agency facility was, like the LHC, a genuine institution of real capability. The Mission Control Center, where human teams had guided spacecraft to every planet in the solar system. The astronaut training facilities. The engineering bays where spacecraft were designed and tested. All of it real, all of it extraordinary by pre-interstellar standards. The Dominion team spent the morning working through the official tour. Venn asked questions. The human guides answered. The situation was, superficially, the same as Geneva. And then, at 11 in the morning, they were shown the spacecraft assembly bay. There was a vehicle in the bay. Sarat noticed the vehicle before anything else happened because she noticed things, because noticing things was what she did. And the vehicle in the assembly bay was not any spacecraft she had decoded from human public broadcasts. It was large. Much larger than the shuttle that had brought Earth's delegation to the first contact meeting. Larger, in fact, than anything she had seen described in human public space programs. It was not complete, clearly still in assembly, surrounded by scaffolding, with sections of its hull open and workers visible inside the framework. But even incomplete, its outline was clear. It was designed for something. She looked at the shape, at the proportions, at the specific configuration of what appeared to be engine systems at the rear. She looked at the size of the fuel systems relative to the hull dimensions. She ran, automatically, the kind of quick analysis that her training had built into her over decades. The numbers did not make sense for a system travel vehicle. The numbers, in fact, made no sense at all for any vehicle designed to operate within a single solar system. They made sense for something else. Something much larger. Much further. She kept her face neutral with the expertise of long professional practice and said nothing, but in her peripheral vision she saw Osei watching her. Watching her specifically, not the Dominion team in general, with those quiet, assessing eyes. He knew she had noticed. She knew he knew. They looked at each other for a brief moment, over the heads of the other people in the bay. His expression was entirely neutral. So was hers. That night, Sarat's report to Varek was longer. High Commander. Second day of observation. I need to report something I cannot yet fully explain. In the spacecraft assembly facility in Houston, there is a vehicle under construction that I cannot identify from any public record human space program. Its physical parameters are not consistent with any mission profile I can derive from publicly available human space projects. Based on visual observation and my own structural analysis, I believe this vehicle is designed for travel at a significantly greater range than anything in the acknowledged human space program. I cannot be certain of this. I was not able to access technical specifications, and the vehicle is incomplete. But High Commander, if my assessment is correct, the implications are significant. Either the humans are further along in their space capabilities than their public programs indicate, which we already suspected, or they are further along in their FTL research than Dr. Anand's presentation suggested, which is a different category of concern entirely. I cannot confirm this from one visual observation. I need more access. I am going to request, through diplomatic channels, a more detailed tour of the facility. I believe we need to see what is below the public level of this program. She sent the report. Then she sat at the window of her hotel room and looked out at the Houston night. The city spread out below her in a grid of lights. Thousands of them, millions of them, the concentrated glow of millions of human lives. The sky above was faintly orange with light pollution, but she could see a handful of stars. One of those stars was Keth Prime. She thought about the vehicle in the assembly bay. About its proportions. About the math. She thought about Dr. Anand's careful, precise, comprehensive list. About everything Anand had shared, and everything she might not have shared. She thought about the way Osei had watched her notice the vehicle. Not alarmed. Not defensive. Just watching. Assessing. Filing it away. HFY, she thought, remembering the phrase from the human language files. Now it's our turn. She was not sure, sitting at the window of a hotel in Houston, looking at the orange-tinted sky, which of them the phrase applied to. Sarat's request for deeper access was handled with extraordinary politeness. Dr. Anand received it, acknowledged it, said she would need to consult with the relevant authorities, and came back 3 days later with a modified proposal. Not full access to the vehicle assembly bay, but access to a research facility in Nevada that was, Anand said, perhaps more relevant to your scientific team's interests. The Nevada facility was not on any public list. It was not something the Dominion's analysis of human broadcasts had turned up. It existed on no maps accessible to their signals team. The only reason they were being offered access was because they had asked the right question, had pushed for deeper access than the standard tour provided, and the humans had decided to give them something, apparently calculated to be interesting enough to satisfy without revealing too much. Sarat understood this calculus. She had used it herself. Give them something real. Give them something genuinely impressive. Let them feel like they're getting beneath the surface. Make sure that beneath the surface you show them is still not the actual bottom. She went to Nevada anyway because whatever the humans had chosen to show them was likely to be revealing in ways they hadn't intended. The Nevada facility was in the desert, 3 hours from Las Vegas by road. It was built partially underground with only a modest surface presence. A cluster of low buildings that could have been anything. A research station. A government administrative facility. Something quiet and ordinary. Below the surface it was something else. They were taken down through 3 levels of security, biometric scans, equipment checks, the kind of layered access control that implied the facility took its security requirements very seriously. Dr. Anand was with them, along with a scientist Sarat had not met before. A man introduced as Dr. Robert Chin, head of something called the Advanced Propulsion Research Division. Dr. Robert Chin was a tall man, perhaps 60, with the specific quietness of someone who lived inside a problem. He explained the facility's purpose as they walked. We've been working on advanced propulsion concepts here for about 20 years, he said. He was talking to Ven, the Dominion science director, but Sarat noted that he was also monitoring her reactions in his peripheral vision. Specifically, we've been looking at propulsion systems that go beyond what conventional physics allows. Beyond conventional physics, Ven said. Beyond what we can achieve with conventional propellant systems, Chin clarified, with the slight smile of a scientist who is used to people assuming he is speaking poetically when he is being technical. Energy densities that rocket fuel can't provide. Drive systems that don't rely on Newton's third law. Ven blinked his 3 eyes. You are describing reactionless drive systems. We're describing research into propulsion concepts that include reactionless configurations, yes. Chin pushed open a heavy door. We haven't achieved a practical drive system yet. But we've had some interesting results. The room beyond the door was large, 2 stories high, perhaps 40 meters across. The ceiling was exposed industrial infrastructure. The floor was a polished composite material that absorbed rather than reflected light. In the center of the room was a test rig. On the test rig was an engine. It was not large. About the size of a small car, by Sarat's estimate. A cylinder of dark metal with a complex field generation coil array wrapped around its exterior. It was connected to a monitoring station at the far end of the room by a thick bundle of cables. The monitoring station showed a cascade of data screens, all active. We call this Phase 7, Chin said. 7th generation of the main design. Each generation has shown improvement in the core metric. Which metric? Ven asked. Thrust produced per unit of input energy, Chin said. In our first-generation prototype, we were seeing results consistent with conventional electrodynamics, which is to say within the range of ordinary experimental error. Nothing to write home about. He paused. By Phase 4, we were seeing consistent results that exceeded conventional prediction by approximately 300%. Enough to confirm we were seeing a real effect, not noise. And Phase 7? Ven asked. His voice was perfectly controlled. Sarat could tell from long practice reading Keth facial micro-expressions that he was not calm. Chin looked at Phase 7 with the expression of a person who has been staring at the same beautiful and confounding puzzle for 20 years. Phase 7 produces thrust output that we cannot currently fully explain with our existing theoretical framework. Consistent, reproducible, exceeds our model predictions by approximately. He paused, checking his tablet. 4,700%. The room was very quiet. Ven said, You cannot explain it. We have models that describe it, Chin said carefully. Models that require some theoretical assumptions we haven't fully validated yet. But the effect is real. Phase 7 works. We just don't completely understand why yet. He smiled again. Which is, honestly, the most exciting kind of experiment. Sarat looked at Phase 7. At the coils. At the configuration of the field generators. She was not a propulsion physicist. But she had clearance to access the Dominion's technical databases, and she had a very good memory, and she was looking at something that, if she was reading the design correctly, bore a strong resemblance to a drive principle that the Dominion's own science division had first theorized approximately 300 years ago. 300 years ago. And had achieved a functional prototype of, she searched her memory, approximately 150 years ago. The humans were maybe 50 years behind based on what she was seeing. 50 years. For a technology that the Dominion had taken 3,000 years to even theorize about. She looked at Anand, who was watching her. You're running it right now? Sarat said. Continuously, Chin confirmed. We've had Phase 7 running for 8 months. Continuous operation. We're monitoring for degradation, efficiency changes, any signs of instability. He looked at the engine with what Sarat identified from her training in human expression as affection. She's been very well behaved. Sarat looked at the engine. She thought about the vehicle in the Houston Assembly Bay. About its dimensions. About the fuel system configuration that made no sense for inter-system travel. She thought about the fact that this facility was not on any public map. She thought about what would happen if you took a drive principle that the Dominion had needed 3,000 years to theorize and put it in the hands of a species that had just shown Varek it could compress 3,000 years of science into 300. What would 50 years of refinement on that drive look like? What would 10 years of refinement look like? If the artificial general intelligence Anand had described came online and was pointed at the problem? She thought about the vehicle in Houston. When, she said to Dr. Chin, do you expect to achieve a crude prototype? Chin and Anand exchanged a look that was brief and calibrated, the look of two people who had prepared for this question and agreed on the answer. We're some years away from that, Chin said. How many years? Several, he said. That's not a number, Sarat said. Chen smiled. No, he said. It isn't. Saret's report to Varric that night was the longest she had ever written. She sent it and then sat in her hotel room and felt something she had not felt in 30 years of intelligence work. Genuine uncertainty. Not about the facts, she was fairly confident about the facts. But about the implications. About what the facts meant for the Dominion's relationship with humanity. About what the facts meant for her own assessment of the provisional arrangement. She had come to Earth expecting to find what the Dominion's analysts had described. A species with theoretical knowledge ahead of their practical technology, impressive in certain areas, concerning in their development rate, but ultimately manageable. Pre-interstellar. Primitive by practical standards. She was sitting in a hotel room in Nevada 48 hours into her second week, and she was no longer sure manageable was the right word. She thought about Phase 7. About the engine running continuously in its underground room, producing thrust that exceeded prediction by 4,700%, that Chen could describe but not fully explain. She thought about what it implied, that the humans had stumbled into a phenomenon, probably while investigating something else, probably through one of their thousands of independent research programs running in parallel in dozens of countries, and they had noticed it, documented it, refined it, and built a seventh-generation prototype in what was probably less than 20 years. Because that was how they worked. Not in the organized, top-down, methodical way of Dominion science. In the chaotic, competitive, simultaneous, 800 different programs running at once way of a species that had never been unified enough to develop one single approach to anything. Which meant there were probably other programs. Other Phase 7s. Other anomalies being quietly investigated in other underground facilities in other countries, by other teams, producing other results that no one had thought to show the Dominion observers. How many? She thought. And what are they? She opened her laptop. She had learned to use the human device, a necessary tool for the work she was doing, and began composing a message to Varric. She wrote, High Commander. I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the human technological situation. We assessed them as a species with impressive theoretical knowledge and limited practical application. I'm now revising that assessment. What we have been shown is the public layer of their practical application. There are additional layers. I do not yet know how many. I believe that determining this should become our primary objective for the remainder of the provisional arrangement. More to follow. She sent it. Then she sat very still in the quiet of the desert night and thought about what Caro meant, a word she had picked up from human language files, used colloquially to mean something like just enough, and how, in this case, she was not sure just enough was going to be sufficient. For the Dominion. Or for herself. Varric received Saret's reports and read them all in a single sitting. He sat in his briefing room on the Eternal Sovereign, 150,000 kilometers from Earth, and read everything his intelligence officer had sent him over the 2 weeks of observation. He read the report about the LHC, the report about Houston, the report about Nevada, the various smaller observations about human behavior, infrastructure, cultural patterns, military readiness. When he finished, he sat for a long time without moving. Then he called Leth. Recall Saret and the observer team, he said. Leth was quiet for a moment. The provisional arrangement is not yet complete, High Commander. I know. Recall them anyway. I need a full briefing from Saret in person, not via transmission. Another pause. The humans will note the early recall. It may affect. Let it affect, Varric said. Recall them. Yes, sir. He closed the channel. He stood and walked to the observation window. Earth was visible, a glowing blue-green arc at the edge of his view. Beautiful. Alive. Full of a species that had, he was now thinking, been significantly underestimated from the first moment his scouts had detected their electromagnetic signals. He thought about the standard Dominion protocol. The protocol that the Council had referenced. The one that said, in language that was perfectly clear to anyone who worked in the Dominion's administrative structure, if the provisional arrangement does not produce a satisfactory integration agreement within 1 year, the Dominion reserves the right to proceed with standard protocol. He thought about what standard protocol looked like. A demonstration of force sufficient to compel compliance. The Dominion had done it before. Ships positioned in close orbit of the target world. A targeted display, a strike against an uninhabited moon, perhaps, or a remote geographic feature, large enough to make the point. Then a second, firmer integration offer. Then, if necessary, a more serious demonstration. It had worked every time on every species the Dominion had ever encountered. He thought about whether it would work on humanity. He thought about Phase 7, running continuously underground in a Nevada desert, producing thrust that exceeded model predictions by 4,700%. He thought about the vehicle in the Houston Assembly Bay, with its dimensions that Sarrett had described as inconsistent with intersystem travel. He thought about a species that had achieved theoretical mastery of disciplines that took the Dominion 3,000 years to develop, in 300 years, and was still accelerating. He thought about 10,000 years of human warfare. About a species that had never, in all that time, run out of new weapons to develop. He thought about artificial general intelligence, which Anand had described as 10 to 15 years away. And he thought about what a species at humanity's current development rate, with AI of that capability pointed at their physics and materials science and propulsion research, would look like in 15 years. Or 10. Or 5. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he made a decision that he knew with absolute certainty would define the rest of his career. Possibly the rest of his life. Possibly the history of both civilizations. He opened a channel to the council. This is High Commander Varric. I am requesting an emergency session of the full council. The matter is urgent. I have a recommendation regarding the human situation that requires immediate discussion. I will transmit supporting materials simultaneously. He spent the next 6 hours preparing the most important report he had ever written. The council met in emergency session. They read Varric's report. They listened to his summary. They looked at Sarrett's observations, at Ressa's analysis, at the technical assessments his team had compiled. And then, for the first time in the memory of any living Keth, the Dominion Council had an argument. A real argument. Not the measured political disagreement that was standard council procedure. A genuine raised voices, 3 different factions argument that lasted through a full day cycle and into the next. Omith's faction argued for standard protocol. Force. Demonstration. Compel compliance before the humans developed anything else. If we wait, Omith said, we are betting the Dominion on our ability to predict the timeline of their development. Every additional year we wait is an additional year of risk. Dress's faction argued for expanded provisional arrangement. More time. More observation. We do not yet know what we do not know, she said, for the second time in the Council's deliberations on the human question. Proceeding with force against a species we do not fully understand has historically been successful, Omith interrupted. Not always as successful as the records suggest, Dress said quietly. History is written by the survivors, Omith. The Dominion has been the survivor in every previous conflict. But there is no guarantee. There is every guarantee, Omith said. We have 3 dreadnoughts. They have Phase 7, Dress said. Silence. They have Phase 7, she said again. An engine that no human can fully explain, that exceeds their own theoretical predictions by 4,700%, that has been running continuously for 8 months. And they have it in what appears to be a vehicle designed for transit beyond their solar system. And they have artificial general intelligence coming in less than 15 years. And they have a development curve that has not slowed in 300 years and shows every sign of accelerating. She looked at Omith. And they have 10,000 years of weapons development experience, conducted under the most competitive and pressurized conditions imaginable. And they have this. She held up a small data chip. This is the encoded content of a human military communication that Varric Signals team decoded 6 days ago. It is a briefing document for their General Harlow's program, the defense program that has been running for 30 years in preparation for exactly this contact. She put the chip down on the table. They knew we were coming, she said. Not specifically, but in general. They knew something might come from the stars and they have been preparing. And what Varric is telling us is that the preparation they have done in 30 years is, in certain specific areas, not laughably primitive. In certain specific areas, it is concerning. Omith said nothing. Varric had been quiet through most of the debate. Now she spoke. Varric's recommendation, she said, is a third option. Not standard protocol. Not expanded provisional arrangement. A genuine partnership offer. We do not partner, Omith said. We integrate. We have never encountered a species like this, Varric said. We have never encountered a species whose development curve suggests they will, within a human generation, be our scientific equals or better. We have never encountered a species whose preparations for first contact included an active defense development program that has been running for 30 years. She looked around the table. The question before this council is not whether to maintain Dominion supremacy. The question is whether the strategy we have used for 4,000 years is still the optimal strategy for this situation. The argument continued. In the end, it was Dress who provided the framing that brought the council to a resolution. Let me ask a simpler question, she said. If we attempt standard protocol, a demonstration of force to compel compliance, and it works, what do we gain? We gain 113 species in the Dominion. We gain a species that has been conquered against its will, that has extensive technological development, that has a 30-year military preparation program, that is currently building vehicles of uncertain purpose, and that has an artificial general intelligence project 15 years from completion. She let that sit for a moment. And if we attempt standard protocol and it does not work, she said. What does Varek's analysis suggest a species with Phase 7 and a 30-year military preparation program and 10,000 years of weapons development experience does when provoked? Silence. I am not saying they can defeat 3 Dominion dreadnoughts today, Dress said. I am saying I am not certain they cannot. And I am saying that even if we succeed today, the scenario 10 years from today, after their AGI completes development, after their propulsion program matures, after 30 years of preparation has had 10 more years to develop, may be considerably less favorable. She looked at Omuth. We have never been in a war with a species we could not be absolutely certain of defeating. I do not believe now is the time to discover what that feels like. The vote was 8-4 in favor of Varek's recommendation. The Dominion Council authorized a genuine partnership offer. For the first time in 4,000 years. The second formal meeting between the Dominion delegation and Earth's representatives took place 3 weeks after the first. This time, Varek requested the meeting be held in a larger format, not the small shuttle, not 2 people on each side. He requested a formal conference setting. Earth chose Geneva again and offered the use of a UN Assembly Hall, a large, circular room designed for multilateral meetings, with simultaneous translation capabilities that the humans had adapted to accommodate the Keth language systems. Varek arrived in a shuttle with his full delegation team. Himself, Leth, Res, Sarat and 4 other senior officers. He was met on the tarmac by Ambassador Walsh and her team, which had expanded too. General Harlow was there this time, standing at the back of the human delegation, and he was not being quiet observant now. He was standing with the particular stillness of a person who knows the critical moment of a long operation has arrived. They went inside. They sat at a table designed for this kind of conversation, large enough to accommodate both delegations without either feeling crowded, arranged so that neither side's position at the table implied hierarchy. Walsh opened. High Commander Varek. We appreciate your request for this meeting. We are prepared to listen to whatever you wish to discuss. Varek looked at her. At the full human delegation. At Harlow still. He said, I am going to say something that I want you to hear carefully, because it is not something I say in the normal conduct of Dominion business. Walsh waited. I have been doing this work for 120 years, Varek said. I have made first contact with 47 species. I have conducted the integration negotiations for 23 of them personally. I have never, in 120 years, encountered a species that gave me a reason to question the Dominion's standard approach. He paused. You have given me a reason, he said. The room was very quiet. The Galactic Dominion standard approach, he continued, is designed for species that are developing along a standard trajectory. Species that achieve space travel after many thousands of years of steady technological progress. Species that are, when we find them, at a level of development that makes the question of who controls the relationship obvious and uncomplicated. He looked at Walsh. You are not developing along a standard trajectory. Your development rate is unlike anything in our 4,000 years of records. Your theoretical understanding significantly exceeds your practical technology, which means that practical gap will close, and when it does, the closing will be rapid. He folded his 4-fingered hands on the table. I am not here today to offer you integration, he said. I am here to offer you a partnership. Silence. Walsh said, tell me what that means. It means a bilateral agreement. Not a status relationship, not the Dominion governing Earth as a subject world. A genuine bilateral relationship between Earth and the Dominion, based on mutual interest and mutual benefit. It means access to Dominion technology in exchange for collaboration on human research. It means Dominion support for Earth's continued independent development. It means a defense arrangement that protects Earth from threats you are not yet aware of, in exchange for Earth's participation in Dominion-wide scientific cooperation. And Earth's political independence? Walsh said. Maintained, Varek said. This is the part that is not standard. He paused. Earth would govern itself. Your political structures, your laws, your internal affairs, these remain yours. You would have a bilateral relationship with the Dominion, not a governance relationship. Walsh looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. Varric looked back. "Because," he said, "there are things your species has already developed, or is in the process of developing, that the Dominion wants access to. And the most direct way to get that access, without spending the next 100 years managing the consequences of a forced integration of a species that has been preparing for our arrival for 30 years, is to make you an offer that is worth accepting." General Harlow spoke for the first time in the meeting. "You know about the program?" he said. Varric looked at him. "We know about some of your program, General." "Enough." Harlow nodded slowly. "Phase 7. Among other things." Pause. "What other things?" Harlow said. Varric looked at him steadily. "The things you have not yet shown us." He paused. "We know they exist. We do not know their specifics. And I want to be honest with you about this, General, because I think honesty is more useful than pretense. The fact that we know they exist without knowing what they are, is the primary reason I am sitting at this table offering a partnership rather than a demonstration." Harlow was quiet for a moment. Then something crossed his face, something that might, in a human, have been a smile suppressed before it fully formed. "Caro," he said, using the word in a way that Sarah, sitting 2 seats from Varric, recognized instantly as deliberate. "Just enough." They had shown the Dominion just enough. Precisely and deliberately just enough. "Yes," Varric said, and there was something in his voice that might have been, in a Keth, something like rueful admiration. "Exactly that." The negotiation took 3 weeks. It was, by every account from both sides, the most complex and exhausting and important 3 weeks in the history of either civilization. Walsh negotiated for Earth. She was supported by a team of 20 diplomats, scientists, lawyers, economists, and military advisors. The best Earth had, assembled from every nation that had any stake in the outcome, which was every nation. Because everyone understood that this was not a treaty between countries. This was a treaty between Earth and the stars. Varric negotiated for the Dominion. He was supported by Leth, Sarat, Res, and a direct communication channel to the Council on Keth Prime that allowed him to consult and receive guidance on the most contentious points. There were many contentious points. Technology access was one. The Dominion offered access to its full scientific database, 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge, in exchange for immediate open access to all of Earth's active research programs. Earth's negotiators pushed back. Open access to all programs implied access to Branch 4, the defense program. General Harlow drew a clear line there and Walsh backed him. The defense program would not be opened. Not until there was a defense arrangement in place that Earth trusted. The defense arrangement was contentious. The Dominion's initial proposal gave the Dominion defense authority over Earth in exchange for Dominion protection. Earth's negotiators refused this immediately and clearly. Earth would not cede defense authority to anyone. They were willing to discuss a cooperative arrangement, a mutual defense agreement, a framework in which Earth and the Dominion shared information and coordinated responses to threats. But not Dominion authority. Not Dominion control. Governance was the most contentious. The Dominion had never negotiated a bilateral partnership arrangement before. The legal and administrative frameworks did not exist. Every clause had to be written from scratch. But 3 weeks after it began they had something. It was not perfect. Both sides had compromised more than they were comfortable with. Some clauses were ambiguous, deliberately because the ambiguities were in areas where neither side could yet know what the right answer was, and pretending otherwise would have broken the negotiation. Some issues were deferred entirely to follow-up discussions that would take years to resolve. But it was real. It was signed. It was witnessed by representatives of 14 Earth governments and 2 senior Dominion Council members who had made the journey specifically for the signing. The Earth-Dominion Partnership Accord. The first bilateral agreement in the Dominion's 4,000-year history. Sarah Chin watched the signing on a small screen in the monitoring room in New Mexico. She had been tracking the Dominion ships since the day they arrived. She had watched them move in from the outer system. She had watched them hold at 150,000 kilometers. She had watched the observer team's shuttle come and go. She had watched the delegations travel to Geneva. She watched the signing. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Jake Torres was beside her. He was watching the screen too. When the signing was over, he looked at her. "That's it," he said. "We're in some kind of galactic agreement?" "Apparently," Sarah said. "An agreement with aliens. With actual aliens." He shook his head. "That's wild." "Yeah. What do you think happens now?" Sarah thought about it. About 4,000 years of Dominion history and 112 species, and the things that Anand had described to the Dominion in the shuttle meeting, and the things she had been briefed somewhat that Sarah had found in Nevada. She thought about Phase 7 running in the desert. She thought about the vehicle in Houston. I think, she said slowly, that the universe is about to find out what happens when you give humanity access to the stars before humanity is finished figuring out what it can do. Jake thought about this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Sarah looked at the screen. At the two delegations standing beside each other in the Geneva Hall, in the first photograph that had ever been taken of humans and Keth together in the same frame. I think, she said, it depends on who you ask. 5 years after the signing of the Earth Dominion Partnership Accord, the universe was different. Not in the dramatic, explosive way of science fiction. Not in the overnight transformation way that people who had watched the signing ceremony had imagined it might be. Change at civilizational scale is slow even when it is fast by historical standards. 5 years was, in the perspective of the Dominion's 4,000-year history, less than a heartbeat. But in those 5 years things changed. They changed at the human end of the partnership first. The access to the Dominion's scientific database, 40 centuries of accumulated knowledge from 112 species, synthesized, cross-referenced, and now available to human researchers, was, as Dr. Anand had described the human development trajectory to Varek, not additive. It was multiplicative. Human researchers did not treat the Dominion database the way a student reads a textbook. They did not read it start to finish. They did not absorb it category by category in an organized progression. They did what human researchers had always done with new information. They tore into it from 100 directions at once. They looked at the Dominion's solutions to problems and immediately started arguing about whether the solutions were optimal. They found gaps in Dominion science, things the Dominion had not studied or had studied and dismissed, or had simply never thought of, and started working on them. They combined Dominion insights with human insights in ways that Dominion scientists had never considered, because the combination required knowledge of both bodies of work. Within 18 months of the database access beginning, human research teams had published 11 papers that the Dominion Science Division flagged as containing genuine novel contributions to knowledge. Not adaptations of Dominion work. New things. Things the Dominion had not known. Within 3 years the number was 44. Within 5 years, it was 187. Varek received the quarterly reports on this from Res. He read them each time with the same careful attention he had given everything in this assignment. And each time, the number at the top of the novel contributions list was larger. He had stopped being surprised by the number. He had started being curious about the distribution. Because the novel contributions were not in one area. They were spread across disciplines: physics, biology, materials science, computation, medicine, ecology. They were not being produced by one institution, one country, one team. They were coming from everywhere. From universities in the United States and Japan and Germany and India and Brazil. From private research companies. From government laboratories. From independent researchers working in small groups who had read the database on their own time and thought of something new. It was, Varek had said to Leth on the 3rd anniversary of the Accord, like watching something that has been compressed for a very long time suddenly have room to expand. Leth had thought about this. Is that what we wanted? She had asked. He had not answered immediately. He had thought about the council sessions. About Omitha's arguments. About Dress's careful, old-voiced concerns. About the vote that had authorized the partnership. I don't know what we wanted, he had said finally. I know what we were afraid of. We were afraid of what humanity would look like in 100 years of independent development. I think what we wanted was to make that future less threatening by being part of it. Are we achieving that? He had looked at the quarterly report. At 187 novel scientific contributions in 5 years. I think, he had said slowly, that we may have made it more so. At the human end of the partnership, it was the propulsion work that produced the first truly galactic shock. Not Phase 7, though Phase 7 had continued to develop and by year 3 had a Phase 8 prototype with output characteristics that Chen's team described, with characteristic understatement, as substantially improved. No, the galactic shock came from something else. From the combination of Phase 8 drive principles with the Dominion's own database materials. A combination that a joint human-Keth research team had been working on in a facility in New Mexico for 2 years. The joint team was co-led by Dr. Priya Anand and a Keth scientist named Vask, who was the Dominion's foremost propulsion physicist and who had, over 2 years of working with human researchers, developed what Varek privately thought was the most interesting professional relationship in the history of the Dominion. They fought constantly, Vask's methodical approach clashing with Anand's tendency to jump between ideas, and produced results that neither of them could have produced alone. The result in year 4 was a prototype drive system. Not a full FTL drive. Not yet. But a drive system that, in controlled testing, produced velocity increments that the Dominion's experts, reviewing the test data, had initially assumed were instrument errors. They were not instrument errors. The system achieved thrust efficiency figures that exceeded anything in the Dominion database by a factor of approximately 11. Not 4,700%, like Phase 7. 11 times the best Dominion figures. In a prototype. In year 4 of the partnership, by a joint team that had been working together for 2 years. Varric transmitted the test results to the Council with a brief note that said only, "I told you." The Council's response came back in 8 days. It said, "We understand. What do you recommend?" He recommended expansion. More joint research teams. More human access to Dominion infrastructure. More Dominion scientists working in human facilities. Not because he was no longer concerned, he was very concerned in a complex way that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. But because he understood, by year 4, what he had been trying to understand since the first day he had read Ressa's report about human broadcasts. Humanity was going to reach the level of the Dominion's technology regardless of what the Dominion did. The question was not whether. The question was whether the Dominion was part of that journey or whether it watched from the outside while humanity arrived at the destination alone. And a humanity that arrived at the destination alone, after 4,000 years of Dominion civilization had tried to absorb or redirect or manage their development, was a humanity that would have very clear and specific feelings about the Dominion. Whereas a humanity that arrived at the destination as a partner, as the species that had brought new things to the oldest civilization in the galaxy, that had added 187 novel contributions to the accumulated knowledge of 4 millennia, that was a different thing. That was something that had never existed before. Varric was not sure what it would be. But he thought it was probably the most interesting thing that had happened in the galaxy in a very long time. The things that happened at the human end of the partnership were visible. The things that happened at the Dominion end were slower to surface but, in the end, more profound. The 112 species of the Dominion watched. They watched the partnership with the careful attention of populations who have been part of an absorbing empire for generations, who have learned to watch the decisions of the powerful with quiet interest, because those decisions eventually reach everyone. They watched the Dominion make, for the first time, a bilateral agreement. They watched the Dominion scientists work alongside humans as colleagues rather than superiors. They watched the quarterly reports, which the Council had decided, after considerable internal debate, to make available to all member world administrations, showing the novel contributions. And certain member worlds, certain administrations, certain scientists and engineers on planets that had been integrated into the Dominion decades or centuries ago, began to ask questions. Questions about their own status. About what bilateral meant and why it applied to humanity but not to them. About whether the framework that had worked for 4,000 years was, perhaps, not the only framework available. These questions were not yet loud. They were not yet challenges. They were, in the language of careful politics, concerns being raised through appropriate channels. Varric was aware of them. He was also aware that they were not his problem to solve alone. They were the Council's problem. They were the Dominion's problem. And they were, perhaps, in some larger sense, the beginning of a conversation about what 4,000 years of one kind of civilization might choose to become. He thought about this on the 5th anniversary of the Accord, standing at the observation window of the Eternal Sovereign, looking at Earth. He had been assigned here for 5 years now. The assignment had been extended twice. He did not expect it to end soon. The planet below was the same planet he had approached with 3 dreadnoughts and the confidence of 4,000 years of Dominion supremacy. The same blue-green sphere wrapped in white clouds. Beautiful. Alive. Full. But 5 years on he knew it differently. He knew what was in the Nevada desert, and what was in the Assembly Bay in Houston, and what Dr. Anand's team had built in New Mexico with Vask's help. He knew what 187 novel scientific contributions looked like when spread across a year in quarterly reports. He knew what a species looked like when it had been building toward this moment for 30 years without anyone but itself knowing. He pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold glass. "I underestimated you," he said to the planet, which could not hear him. "From the beginning. From the first report. Every step of the way, I underestimated you." He thought about what the next 5 years would produce. He thought about the vehicle in Houston, which had been completed in year 3 and which, according to Saret's ongoing intelligence work, had conducted its first test flight in year 4. A short flight. Into the outer solar system and back. No incident. No drama. Just a test. He thought about what the test had produced. About what Vask and Anand's drive prototype, in the hands of engineers who had been building spacecraft for 60 years and designing military systems for 10,000, might become in the next 3 years. Or 2. Or 1. He thought about the day, and he was fairly certain now that it was coming, within the lifetime of the current partnership, when a human-built ship would emerge from faster-than-light travel somewhere in the galaxy, and would be seen by someone, and that someone would ask the obvious question. And the answer would not be the Galactic Dominion. The answer would be something new. Something that had not existed before 5 years ago. Something that was neither the Dominion as it had been, nor humanity as it would have been without contact, but a third thing built from both. He took his hand from the glass. HFY, he said softly. Now it's our turn. He was not sure, saying it, which species he meant. He suspected he meant both. What humans actually needed, not what a command space was traditionally supposed to look like. There was, he noted, an extraordinary number of screens. Captain Elena Vasquez was at the command chair. She was 47 years old, former military pilot, with the same quiet alertness he had noticed in every human military professional he had ever met. She greeted him with a nod, not deferential, not dismissive. Peer-to-peer. High Commander. Welcome aboard. Thank you, Captain. He looked around the bridge. You seem ready. We've been ready for 6 months, she said. We've been cautious for 6 months. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Dr. Anand was at a station on the starboard side of the bridge, monitoring drive system status. She looked up when Varric entered, caught his eye, and gave him a nod that was, he thought, the most expressive thing she had ever done in his presence. Vask was beside her. The Keth physicist and his human counterpart, side by side at a monitoring station on the bridge of a human ship that ran a drive they had built together. Vask looked at Varric with an expression that was hard to read, even for a Keth. Varric looked at him. How does it feel? Varric asked. Vask was quiet for a moment. Like nothing, the physicist said. Like exactly what we said it would feel like. Like the equations. Another pause. And also like nothing has ever felt before in my life. Varric nodded. He found a position at the back of the bridge where he was out of the way and could observe. He watched the crew run through the pre-transit checklist, calm, efficient, utterly focused. He watched Captain Vasquez manage her crew with the same quiet, economical authority that the best military commanders of any species shared. He watched Anand at her station, her hands moving over the controls with the speed of someone who had designed the system she was operating. He watched and he thought about everything that had led to this moment. 112 species. 4,000 years. A dominion that had never met a species it could not absorb. And then, a blue-green planet. 300 years of compressed development. 10,000 years of weapons. 30 years of preparation. Phase 7 in the Nevada desert. 187 novel contributions. And now this. A ship named after the woman who had found the fleet in the dark, running a drive built by the people who had been preparing for this day before they knew this day was coming, crewed by people who moved with the specific, unfrightened, utterly focused alertness of a species that had been getting ready for the universe for a very long time. Drive system nominal, Anand reported. Navigation solution confirmed, said the navigator. All stations ready, said the first officer. Captain Vasquez looked at the main screen. At the stars. Hi, Commander Varric, she said without turning around. Any last words before we go? Varric looked at the screen. At the stars that had burned for 4,000 years of Dominion history. At the stars that had burned for 10,000 years of human history before that. At the stars that had been burning since long before any species in this galaxy had looked up at them and wondered. Just one thing, he said. Everyone waited. Welcome to the galaxy, he said, that you have always belonged to. Captain Vasquez turned and looked at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were dark and calm and full of something he couldn't quite name in any language, Keth or English or anything else in the Dominion database. Then she turned back to the screen. Navigation, she said. Execute. The Sarah Chin folded space. The transit lasted 0.4 seconds, subjectively. They emerged in a system 14 light-years from Earth. A system chosen because it was close, empty of inhabited worlds, and well mapped by both the Dominion's charts and Earth's own deep space probes. A safe destination. A first step. The crew of 42 were silent for approximately 3 seconds after emergence. Then Anand said, Drive nominal. Transit successful. All systems green. And then, and Varric would remember this for the rest of his life, however many years of life remained to him, the crew of the Sarah Chin did not cheer. They didn't cry. They didn't embrace each other or pound their fists on their consoles or make the various dramatic gestures he had seen humans make in their emotional broadcast content. They worked. Vasquez was already calling out status checks. The crew was already responding, running diagnostics, logging data, preparing for the transit back. They were already doing what they had been trained to do, what they had been born into a tradition of doing, what 10,000 years of facing challenges with focused competence had trained their species to do. They worked. Varric stood at the back of the bridge of a human ship 14 light-years from Earth, and watched humanity do what humanity did. He looked at Vask. The Keth physicist was looking at Anand. Anand was at her station, her hands moving, her face focused. She hadn't looked up. Vask's expression was something Varric had no word for in any language he spoke. It took him a moment. The word he eventually decided was awe. The return transit was executed 12 minutes after arrival. 14 light-years and 12 minutes. They returned to Earth's system to find both of Varric's remaining dreadnoughts, the unyielding Law and the Throne of Ash, waiting at the agreed coordinates, along with the 3 Earth orbital platforms that had been tasked with monitoring the transit. And a crowd. Not physically, but on the communication channels, the signals that the Sarachen's comm officer was now fielding, one after another, from Earth, from the orbital platforms, from the Dominion ships, from the relay stations that the Dominion had established throughout the inner system. There was something that had no physical form but that filled the channel in a way that felt almost solid. Millions of humans on Earth watching their screens. Dominion Council members on Keth Prime, waiting for the signal that confirmed the transit had occurred. Representatives of other Dominion member species, in their own ships and stations, who had been informed that this day was coming and had been watching. All of them waiting. The Sarachen's comm officer opened the general channel. Captain Vasquez said, "Saracen to all points. Transit successful. 14 light-years. 12 minutes. We are home." The silence on the channel lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then it wasn't silence anymore. Saracen was in her monitoring room in New Mexico when the confirmation came through. She was sitting at her workstation where she had been sitting for 7 years, 4 months, and 11 days since the Tuesday when everything changed. She had been tracking the Saracen on the monitoring array, watching the energy signature of the drive spooling up, watching the moment of transit, the sudden absence of the ship's signature, and then 12 minutes later the return. 14 light-years and 12 minutes. She looked at the data. Jake Torres was beside her. He was 35 now, not 28. He was no longer junior. He was the lead analyst on the night shift, a role he had grown into without either of them quite noticing it happening. He looked at the data too. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she agreed. "They named the ship after you." "I know. You knew weeks ago." "Yes." He thought about this. Outside the monitoring room they could faintly hear noise, other staff in the building who were also watching on their own screens, and who were not being quite as quiet about their reactions as Sarah and Jake were. "How do you feel?" he asked. Sarah looked at the data. At the trace on the screen that showed the Sarachen's return transit. At the small blue numbers that said 14 ly/12 minutes. At the words in the comm log, "We are home." She thought about the Tuesday 7 years ago. About the sandwich she'd been eating. About the triple triangle alert that had made her heart stop. About the 3 amber lights that had appeared in the outer solar system. She thought about everything that had come after. About Walsh and Harlow and Anand and Varric and Sarat and Phase 7 and the Nevada Desert and the Geneva Hall and 187 novel contributions and the vehicle in the Houston Assembly Bay that had become a ship named after her. She thought about what it meant. Not just for Earth, for all of them. For the 112 species who were watching from their worlds, and who were going to ask questions now that they had watched a pre-interstellar species go from first contact to FTL travel in 7 years. Questions about what was possible. About what the framework they had lived inside for 4,000 years was for, and whether it was the only framework. She thought about the universe, which had been enormous and empty and incomprehensible for all of human history, and which was now, still enormous, still incomprehensible in most of its immensity, but no longer empty. She thought about what came next. "I feel," she said slowly, "like we're at the beginning." Jake looked at her. "The beginning of what?" She looked at the screen. At the data. At the small blue numbers. "Everything," she said. Varric returned to the Eternal Sovereign that night. He sat in his briefing room and wrote the last report he intended to write as High Commander of the Third Fleet at Earth's system. Not because his assignment was ending, it wasn't, not officially. But because the situation he had been managing, the situation of Earth as a pre-interstellar species requiring careful monitoring and provisional arrangement, had fundamentally changed. Earth was no longer pre-interstellar. He wrote. To the Dominion Council. I am transmitting the confirmed results of the first human FTL transit, conducted this day aboard the vessel Sarah Chin. 14 light-years and 12 minutes. All technical parameters nominal. The transit drive is based on the joint research of the Anand Vask team, combining human and Dominion propulsion principles in a configuration neither civilization had previously conceived. The performance characteristics of this drive system exceed the best Dominion FTL specifications by a factor of approximately 9. I want to take a moment to note something for the record. When I arrived at Earth System 7 years ago, I believed I was dealing with a pre-interstellar species that required management. I assigned them Class 2 status because something in my experience was telling me to be careful. I do not think I understood at that time how careful I should have been, or rather how wrong the entire framework of careful was. What we were dealing with was not a species to be managed. It was a species that had been managing itself, preparing itself, for longer than most of the Dominion's member worlds have had any knowledge of our existence. They were ready for us before we arrived. Not in the sense that they could have defeated us militarily on the day of first contact, but in the sense that they had already asked the question of what the universe looked like beyond their world, and had already decided to be ready for the answer. The partnership we have built over the past 7 years has been productive beyond any projection I made at its outset. 187 novel scientific contributions. A drive system that exceeds Dominion specifications by a factor of 9. And today, 14 light-years and 12 minutes. But I believe the more significant achievement of the past 7 years is not technological. It is relational. For the first time in 4,000 years, the Dominion has engaged with another civilization as a partner rather than a subject. The member worlds have noticed. The questions being raised through appropriate channels will not go away. My recommendation, as I have recommended consistently throughout this assignment, is that we continue on the path we chose at the Council's vote 7 years ago. Not because it is comfortable, it is not. Not because it is predictable, it is profoundly unpredictable. But because the alternative, 4,000 more years of the same framework, in the same galaxy as a humanity that is now FTL capable and accelerating, is the less comfortable and less predictable option of the two. We have the most interesting neighbor in the galaxy. I recommend we remain their neighbor. High Commander Varek, 3rd Fleet, Earth System. He sent the report. Then he sat for a while longer in the briefing room, the quiet hum of the ship around him, the stars outside, the blue-green glow of Earth at the edge of his view. He thought about the moment on the bridge of the Sarah Chin. About Captain Vasquez's eyes and what they had held. About Anand at her station working. About Vask's expression, which he had eventually decided to name Awe. He thought about something Dr. Anand had said months ago during a conversation that had started as a technical discussion and wandered somewhere else. We've been looking at the stars since before we had language for stars. It was always going to be this way. It was always going to end up with us out here. He had asked her what she meant by end up. She had smiled. Not the end. The beginning. We always knew it was the beginning. Varek had thought about that for a long time. He thought about it now in the quiet briefing room with Earth at the edge of his view. We always knew it was the beginning. He looked at the stars. The same stars that had burned for 40 centuries of Dominion history. The same stars that had burned for 100,000 years of human prehistory. The same stars that had been burning since long before any intelligence in the galaxy had looked up and asked the oldest question. What else is out there? The same stars but different now. Because something was moving through them that had never moved through them before. Not a Dominion ship. Not a Keth vessel. Something that had been built in Houston, Texas, named after a woman in New Mexico, powered by a drive conceived in a meeting of minds that should not have happened and had happened anyway. Something human. Something new. Something that had come from a small blue-green world that the Galactic Dominion had arrived at with the full confidence of 4,000 years of supremacy, and that had looked at the 3 dreadnoughts in its sky and said, with great politeness and absolutely no detectable fear, "Let's talk." The Sarah Chin was still there on the long-range sensors. Preparing, he knew, for its next transit. Not a test this time. A mission. The first human ship to visit another inhabited world, one of the Dominion's member worlds, by invitation, by agreement, by the terms of the partnership that had been built out of an encounter that could have gone so many other ways. He watched the energy signature of its drive warming up. "Caro," he said softly. The human word. Just enough. They had always shown just enough, and it had always been more than sufficient. He thought the word fit something else now. Something larger than its original meaning in the specific, clever way the humans had used it during the provisional arrangement. Fit the whole story. Just enough of the universe's possible futures, just enough of all the ways this could have gone, had bent in the direction that brought them here. To this day. To this moment. To a human ship folding space in a solar system that had been watching the stars for as long as anything alive on it could remember. Just enough. HFY. Now it was their turn. He pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold glass of the observation window, the way he had pressed it on the day he first heard the word human and wondered what it meant. And he watched the Sarah Chin go. The end.